Hey guys, how are you? Wow, it's been a while. It's been a while, and I've got a new book for you. Yeah, cool. So, but before we start, remember there is our shop where we sell books and writing services, and our Redbubble shop with like so many groovy things. There's like over 100 things in there now. So you really must check that out. And what was the other thing they wanted me to say? Oh yeah, please like and subscribe and chat to us because we like that. And man, I know there's something else. Oh yeah, watch to the end. That helps too. So anyway, and share it. That's the other one. That's the other one. Oh, boy, it's hard, this. Remembering all these things. Anyway, I have a book for you. And the book is a writer that we're going to do once and once only because I really don't like her very much. Okay, I like this one book, but I really don't like her. I've read something else of hers, but I find it too depressing. And quite frankly, I'm not of the school of thought that is, oh, if it's miserable, it must be deep. No, if it's miserable, it's just miserable, which is why we're not doing Cormac McCarthy. Don't even bother asking. It's not happening. No, if it's miserable, it's just miserable. Comedy's hard work. Comedy's hard work. So I am also not a speculative fiction person because it's always miserable. And anyway, speculative fiction isn't really about the future. It's only ever about the now and now's problems. And frankly, I don't know. No, I'm not interested, man. Just like, they're real enough. I don't need them in my books. I like to have books to not deal with those problems. So I don't read a whole load of Margaret Atwood. So this is Margaret Atwood with retelling the story of the Odyssey. See, I can get it together sometimes. Laura and I have gone and managed to synchronize here. We're both playing with the old stories. But Margaret Atwood's retelling of the Odyssey from Penelope's perspective. So the Odyssey obviously is the 10 years that Odysseus spends lost at sea. This story tells Penelope's life of the 20 years from her marriage to Odysseus, or slightly over 20 years because Odysseus has his young son Telemachus is already born. But Odysseus marries Penelope. He's one of the suitors for Helen, who is one of Penelope's cousins, and Penelope is given to him in marriage because he comes up with the suitors' pact that stops the suitors fighting amongst each other for Helen, which precipitates the alliance that goes to the Trojan Wars. Wily Odysseus. So this story tells it from the Greek underworld as Penelope. Penelope knows everybody. She knows this story, but she's telling this herself from the Greek underworld. Now, you're going to say, well, this book is all full of wonderful adventures and all sorts of things. Sirens and Laestrygonians and Lotus Eaters and the Cyclops and Scylla and Cerberus and so many other different stories. What has Penelope got to say apart from she sat at home, the suitors got into the house and wouldn't leave her alone, and she spent a while weaving a grave cloth that never got finished. Well, that's kind of the point of this book. Margaret Atwood is talking about how restricted these female lives are. But it's not just in terms of, oh, this is really restricted lives. It's also talking about the way that women will collude in their own oppression, which is something Margaret Atwood is interested in. It's certainly a theme of The Handmaid's Tale, which no, I'm not reading. No, I haven't watched. No, just not happening. But it is something she is very interested in. Also in this, which makes this probably a lot more interesting, is the question of the maids. So the Odyssey from Penelope's point of view is Odysseus is away 10 years in war. He is 10 years lost, 7 of which being a sex slave of a goddess on an island, before the gods say, let him go, let your pet go, man. I mean, because he was kind of miserable, even though he was stooping a goddess. But anyway. But from Penelope's perspective, 3 years, or about 17 years after her husband has gone off to war, after all of the other heroes have returned home, because one of the things that happens is at the end, which you don't really see in the Iliad and the Odyssey, there is a storm that breaks up the fleet, and people get sort of separated, and it wrecks a lot of the Greek fleet because of somebody's hubris at some point. Agamemnon has returned from the wars and been butchered like a hog by his wife and his cousin. They have beef. They have completely legitimate beef with him. He deserves every bit of it. Poor Clytemnestra didn't, but he deserved the lot. Not Clytemnestra, Cassandra. Poor Clytemnestra was the one who butchered him like a hog. Poor Cassandra did not deserve that. But Agamemnon, oh yeah, he deserved that. Anyway, he's returned. Menelaus and Helen are back. Old Nestor is still kicking around. I mean, I question how old Nestor actually is there. But the Greek heroes have returned, and Odysseus still hasn't returned. And because Odysseus still hasn't returned, suitors, all the eligible young men, have rocked up to the palace and basically said, Penelope, you're only about 35. You could still give us an heir. It's your throne, because this is Mycenaean Greece. Mycenaean Greece is matrilineal in terms of its handing down to the throne. The men marry into female families. That's why Helen was so sought. Helen came she wasn't just Helen, she came with the Spartan throne. That's why Clytemnestra had to get sent out to Mycenae to be and adopted into that family to be married as the daughter because the Adarides had completely and utterly destroyed each other. That is why, in spite of the fact that he butchered her husband and her son, Agamemnon married her. So this is the thrones are matrilineal, and men have to compete and marry into them. And now the suitors have turned up saying, basically, you're not that old. We think we would like to be king of Ithaca. And so she has her palace inundated with suitors. The throne doesn't go to Telemachus. He has to go out and find himself a wife of his own. But that's something that by this point is starting to establish a patriarchy and a lineage that is male rather than female. So that's part of this book has some weird things in it that don't quite work in a patrilineal society, but they do work in a matrilineal society, but because these stories are that old. That is how old these stories are. So with this, you have Penelope putting off the suitors, and of course you can't do anything because they're guests in your home. She sends her maids out to, entertain them, but her maids are slaves, and when one of the things Odysseus does, aside from killing all the suitors, he hangs 12 of the maids, who were the maids who the suitors had slept with, because they were his property, and the suitors had stolen his property. And so, throughout this story, you have Penelope telling the story, and then you have the 12 murdered maids butting in. And we don't care what a great husband he was for you. He murdered us for no reason. And you have this question of male violence and female silencing in this story. Because Odysseus kills the suitors, to which he gets in trouble for killing them because he killed guests in his home. He really could have come home and said, hey, I'm the boss here, go away, go, shoo, get lost. But he didn't. He came in rags, strung the bow, tricksy, and then naked, because he tears the rags off, slaughtered all the suitors. And then he and Telemachus killed the maids, and then he goes and has a bath and goes up to his wife. And her defense is, I slept through the whole thing. But the maids will not be silenced. The maids keep bringing this up and up and up again and again and again. I've heard somebody talk of it as a chorus line. And I heard that and I just thought, oh, wow. Wow. Just wow. They're not a chorus line. They're a Greek chorus. They're a Greek chorus of murdered women. The Greek chorus in Greek theatre generally points out the morality of what is happening. Margaret Atwood isn't an idiot. She's not putting a chorus line of maids in. She's putting a Greek chorus of maids in. One of the things that is quite interesting in this, which is something that Margaret Atwood is interested in, is the way that certain women will reinforce or uphold the patriarchy in ways that men never notice. Because it's not Penelope who gives the name of the maids to Odysseus. It's his nurse. You have older women who are no longer fertile, given that in the story is the sole value of women is the children that she can produce. So a woman who can no longer produce children has to earn her position in a dependent society somehow. And she does that by reinforcing the obedience of other women to male desires. And these are often ways that men are entirely unconscious of. I do know that this is something she does with The Handmaid's Tale with the aunts, or the ones who aren't the breeders or the wives. So, but she does this again with the old nurse whose loyalty is not to this new wife who's come in, but to the boy she brought up, to the men of the household. And she names, these are the servants. I had to give him something, otherwise he would have killed all of them. But no question of why does he need to kill any of them? They are slaves. They have no agency. They don't have a choice about this. They didn't choose to sleep with the suitors. The suitors slept with them, regardless of their desire in the matter. The women who enforce obedience do not question why male violence is necessary. They just allow it. And that is something that both Penelope and the maids do question. And it's something that we don't hear about very often is, who are the women who betray other women for a tiny skerrick of power? And what is the power that they're betraying other women to obtain? Generally, that power is the power to exist, the right to exist, the right to having basic needs met. And when you go and create a world in which women have to betray each other to get basic needs met, that's a very dangerous world in which you have created. That's something in this. The idea of justice, when you are powerless, as the Greek chorus of maids are. This how do they get justice? They attempt to appeal to the legal world, but the legal world sides against them, as Athena. Athena is a really curious goddess in the Greek world, because she becomes one of these patriarchy enforcing women. She's a really curious figure for the Greek, in the Greek world. She's a goddess of wisdom. She's a warrior goddess. She's a goddess of justice, but she, generally speaking, sides with the men, because it is Athena whose vote is cast to side against Clytemnestra, putting the Furies onto her son, who frees Orestes from the Furies after he kills her, because he did something he should not have done, which is he killed his mother. She could kill his father all she wanted. That was just straightforward transactional killing. She was not under any sort of hideous curse for killing a bastard husband. But Orestes killed his mother. He killed his mother. Even Oedipus doesn't get in so much trouble for killing his father. It's not the killing his father that he's in trouble for. It's the killing his mother. And yet Athena sides against another woman, against Clytemnestra, to uphold male authority. She is a really curious character. And again, in the Odyssey, and in here, she sides against, in this, she sides with Odysseus to reconcile the families of all the men he's killed, because, yeah, he can't kill guests in his home. Big no-no. And in here, she sides against the maids. She is another example of the betrayal of women for self-interest. She's a really curious character across the whole thing. So it's a very interesting story. We hear of the afterlife of these gods, the going up and having another life. Odysseus goes up and has lived multiple lives, but will not, it always comes to a sticky end. Helen keeps going up for another roll of the dice as a beautiful love interest, Hollywood star, great queen, all these things. Penelope doesn't. Penelope is very angry at the maids because they are what keep her and Odysseus apart, because she doesn't want to go up again and roll the dice. But every time he's down in the underworld with her, he sees the maids and he knows he's done wrong. And so he leaves again. And leaves again. And so her life and her afterlife is of her husband returning and leaving and returning and leaving, and yet she remains loyal to him. So she's a very interesting character. She's a character who is frequently abandoned, who abandons herself in some ways. She puts others before herself. She is a character who's quite a doormat. But that's what being the virtuous wife, as opposed to the not virtuous wife of Helen, who Helen is. She's the contrast to Helen. Clytemnestra is also the contrast to Helen, but Clytemnestra is the murderous, stabby wife. Helen is the disloyal wife, and Penelope is faithful Penelope. Nowadays we would call her codependent. But faithful to Penelope abandons herself for other people over and over and over again throughout her life and then into her afterlife. It's a really interesting book about how women have very narrow options within a heavily patriarchal society, how women are forced to betray each other and themselves again and again and again in order to just be given the basics of survival. It's a fascinating book. It's a fascinating retelling. And much like Laura's book, it's not one you see picked up by the dark academics all that much. It's interesting because while they are quite happy to pore over this one, it's about, but it's not, let's just say it's not the book that they go straight to. Again, I think it's a little bit challenging for their ideas of what it is. But if you like the Greek myths, if you're interested in feminist retellings of old stories, of looking at different perspectives of things, check it out. The Penelopiad, a retelling of the Odyssey from Penelope's point of view. And that's all I have for you guys. So peace and love, and I will see you again sometime later. If you would like to support this channel, come across to the Black Cockie Press website, www.blackcockiepress.com.au, where you will find books and other writing services to help with your writing.